The day Rome burned, Nero, the Great Fire. And the truth history tried to hide. Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into one of history's most infamous moments. July 64 AD Rome, the Eternal City, the beating heart of the greatest empire the world had ever seen, became an inferno. For 6 days and 7 nights, flames consumed everything in their path. Neighborhoods vanished, lives shattered. An empire trembled. And in the middle of it all stood one man, Emperor Nero, the tyrant who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned. The madman who blamed Christians for his own crime. The monster who watched his city die with a smile. But here's the thing. What if everything you think you know about that night is wrong? Before we get started, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our community spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe grab a drink, and let's journey back to ancient Rome, to a night when the world burned, and to the truth that's been buried under ash and propaganda for nearly 2,000 years. The city before the flames. To understand what happened that terrible July night, you need to understand what Rome was. Not the marble monuments and pristine temples you see in movies. The real Rome. The Rome where over 1 million people crammed into a city designed for maybe 100,000. Rome in 64 AD was a city of extremes. Yes, there were magnificent forums and imperial palaces. The Colosseum wasn't built yet, but the Circus Maximus sprawled across the valley, seating 250,000 screaming fans for chariot races. Aqueducts brought fresh water from miles away. Public baths offered luxury even slaves could occasionally enjoy. But step away from the grand avenues, and you'd find a different Rome. The real Rome. The Subura district, where most Romans actually lived. Imagine narrow streets, so cramped that 2 carts couldn't pass each other. Buildings called insulae, apartment blocks that rose 5, 6, even 7 stories high. Rickety structures made of wood and mud brick, leaning against each other like drunk friends stumbling home. No running water above the first floor, no toilets, no fire escapes. Families of 8 crammed into single rooms. The smell, gods, the smell. Sweat, cooking oil, human waste, rotting garbage thrown from upper windows because there was nowhere else to put it. In summer, the heat was suffocating. Buildings baked like ovens, and fire. Fire was Rome's constant nightmare. Cooking fires, oil lamps, candles. Every home had open flames. Every night was a gamble. One toppled lamp, one gust of wind, one careless moment, and an entire block could go up. It happened all the time. Rome had a fire brigade, the vigils, but they were more like bucket brigades. Once a fire really got going, there was no stopping it. The wealthy lived differently, of course. They had their domos, spacious homes with courtyards, marble floors, painted frescoes. They had slaves to carry water, to cook safely, to watch for hazards. They could afford stone and tile. They were protected. But even the rich knew the truth. Rome was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Emperor Nero knew it too. He was 26 years old in July of 64 AD. He'd been emperor for 10 years. Taking the throne at just 16 after his mother Agrippina allegedly poisoned his stepfather, Emperor Claudius. Nero's early reign had actually been pretty good. His advisors, Seneca, the philosopher, and Burrus, the military commander, had guided him well. He'd lowered taxes, supported the arts, and been generally popular with the common people. But by 64 AD, things had changed. Seneca had retired, frustrated with the emperor's growing erraticism. Burrus was dead. Nero's mother. He'd had her killed 3 years earlier. His first wife, Octavia, executed on false adultery charges so he could marry his mistress, Poppaea. The Senate despised him. The old aristocratic families whispered that he was unworthy. that he degraded the imperial office by performing in public as a singer and chariot racer. Real emperors, they muttered, led armies and expanded the empire. They didn't prance around stages in costumes, but the common people. They loved him. Nero gave them games, entertainments, and he seemed to genuinely care about them in a way patrician emperors never had. He was one of them, or at least pretended to be. In mid-July, Nero wasn't even in Rome. He'd gone to Antium, his birthplace on the coast, about 35 miles south. Maybe to escape the summer heat. Maybe to escape the pressures of Rome. Maybe because fate wanted him far away when the city burned, so history could blame him anyway. The night everything changed, July 18th, 64 AD, the date historians settled on, though ancient sources differ slightly. What matters is this: it was the height of summer. Rome sweltered under cloudless skies. The buildings packed so tightly together, trapped the heat. People slept on roofs, in streets, anywhere to catch a breeze. Around midnight, in the merchant district near the Circus Maximus, someone noticed flames. At first, it probably seemed manageable. It's another kitchen fire. The vigils would handle it, but this fire was different. Fed by oil and other flammable goods stored in the shops around the circus, the flames exploded with terrifying speed. The wind, that cursed wind, picked up. It drove the fire in multiple directions at once. Within an hour, dozens of shops blazed. Within 2 hours, entire streets were engulfed. By dawn, half the city knew Rome was burning. Panic set in fast. People grabbed what they could: children, valuables, sacred household gods. But the narrow streets became death traps. Thousands fled toward the Tiber River or the city gates. Families were separated in the chaos. Children lost in the smoke. Elderly unable to keep up, swallowed by the crowds or the flames. The insulae, those towering apartment blocks, became hellish torches. People trapped on upper floors screamed for help that couldn't come. Some jumped, most burned. The heat was so intense that stone cracked. Marble monuments split apart. Bronze statues melted, and it didn't stop. Hour after hour, day after day, the fire raged. The vigils were overwhelmed. They tried their standard tactics, forming bucket chains, tearing down buildings to create fire breaks. But it wasn't enough. The wind kept shifting. The flames kept finding new fuel. By the second day, 10 of Rome's 14 districts were threatened. The Forum Romanum, the heart of Roman civic life, was in danger. The Palatine Hill, where emperors lived, where Nero's palace stood, caught fire. Ancient temples, centuries old, burned. The Temple of Luna, the shrine of Jupiter Stator, irreplaceable repositories of Rome's history, consumed. Eyewitnesses reported seeing people deliberately spreading the flames, throwing torches into untouched buildings, preventing others from fighting fires. Who were these people? Looters taking advantage of chaos, agents of some conspiracy, or just terrified citizens who believed that destroying empty buildings might save occupied ones? We don't know. But their actions fed rumors that would poison Nero's legacy forever. Through it all, where was the emperor? Nero's response: hero or villain? According to legend, Nero stood on a tower, watching Rome burn, and sang about the destruction of Troy. He fiddled while Rome burned, though fiddles wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. The image is powerful. A mad emperor entertained by his city's agony. It's also probably false. Our best sources, the historians Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, actually tell a different story. When news reached Nero at Antium that Rome was burning, he immediately rushed back. Not in a few days, immediately. When he arrived, he threw himself into rescue efforts. He opened the Campus Martis, a large public space, to refugees. He opened imperial gardens. He even opened his own palace. He arranged for emergency grain supplies to be distributed. He personally supervised firefighting efforts. Tacitus, no fan of Nero, admits this. He writes that Nero searched for the bodies of the dead and performed proper funeral rites, that he provided shelter and food from his own resources. So why the legend? Why do we remember Nero as the emperor who fiddled? Politics, propaganda, and the simple fact that people love a good villain story. By the time the fire finally burned itself out on July 24th, 6 days after it started, the damage was catastrophic. Of Rome's 14 districts, 3 were completely destroyed. 7 more were severely damaged. Only 4 escaped relatively unscathed. Hundreds of thousands were homeless. The exact death toll is unknown. Ancient sources don't give numbers, but it was certainly in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Entire neighborhoods gone. Families' entire lives reduced to ash. And in the stunned, smoke-choked aftermath, people needed someone to blame. The blame game? Christians, conspiracies, and scapegoats rumors started immediately. Some said the fire was divine punishment for Rome's decadence. Others whispered about conspiracies. But the most damaging rumor was this: Nero ordered it. The emperor himself had Rome burned. Why would anyone think that? A few reasons. First, Nero had ambitious rebuilding plans. He'd long wanted to reshape Rome's center, to create more space, better streets, and to build a magnificent new palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. A fire would clear away all those pesky property rights and existing structures. Second, witnesses claimed to have seen people preventing firefighting and spreading flames. If those were Nero's agents, it proved conspiracy. Third, Nero was theatrical, unpredictable, and by 64 AD, increasingly disconnected from reality. He'd killed his own mother. Would burning Rome really be beyond him? But there's a problem with this theory. Nero's palace burned too. The old imperial palace on the Palatine Hill was destroyed. If Nero wanted to clear space, why burn his own home? Still, the rumors spread. And Nero, for all his faults, was smart enough to know he needed a different scapegoat. Fast, enter the Christians. In 64 AD, Christianity was a tiny, strange sect. Most Romans had barely heard of them. They followed a Jewish preacher who'd been executed in a backwater province decades earlier. They refused to worship Roman gods or the emperor. They held secretive meetings and spoke of the world ending in fire. Perfect scapegoats. Tacitus tells us what happened next to suppress the rumor. Nero substituted as culprits persons hated for their evil practices, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius. Nero ordered mass arrests. Christians were rounded up, accused of arson. What followed was horrific, even by Roman standards. Some were sewn into animal skins and thrown to dogs. Others were crucified. Still others were covered in pitch and set on fire to serve as human torches illuminating Nero's gardens at night. Tacitus, again no friend of Christians, admits that an abhorrence of their abominable crimes was overcome by a sense of pity. For it was not for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed. Even Romans who despised Christians thought Nero had gone too far. The executions were so excessive, so sadistic, that they backfired. Sympathy shifted toward the victims. Suspicion toward Nero deepened. But here's what's interesting. Modern historians doubt Christians actually started the fire. There simply weren't enough of them in Rome in 64 AD. They were a marginal group, maybe a few thousand in a city of over 1 million. They didn't have the organization or numbers to pull off something this massive. More likely, the fire was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident in a city built to burn. But accidents don't satisfy human psychology. We want villains. We want meaning. We want someone to blame. Nero gave Rome a villain, but history made Nero the villain instead, rebuilding the Golden House and a new Rome once the ashes cooled. Nero launched the most ambitious reconstruction project in Roman history. And this is where things get complicated, because his response was actually ... impressive. He implemented new building codes. Insulate could no longer be built entirely of wood. Minimum spacing between buildings. Maximum heights. Wider streets. More open spaces. These weren't just cosmetic changes. They were genuine fire safety measures that would protect Rome for centuries. He used his own money, not just state funds, to help with reconstruction. He provided temporary housing. He kept grain prices low to prevent famine. But then came the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, Nero's new palace. It was obscene in scale, covering an estimated 300 acres. It sprawled across multiple hills, swallowing some of the most valuable land in Rome. Its entrance hall supposedly housed a 120-foot bronze statue of Nero as the sun god. The dining rooms had rotating ceilings that showered guests with flowers and perfume. One room's ceiling was decorated with precious stones. The grounds included an artificial lake, forests, and a private game preserve. It was, without exaggeration, one of the most extravagant structures ever built. And Rome hated it. Because while thousands still lived in temporary shelters, while families struggled to rebuild, the emperor was constructing a pleasure palace on land cleared by the fire. It didn't matter that he'd helped immediately after the disaster. It didn't matter that his new building codes saved lives. All people saw was that Nero profited from catastrophe. Suetonius records that graffiti appeared across Rome. Rome will become one house. Citizens moved to Vigi. Vigi was a nearby town. The message was clear. Nero was taking over the entire city for himself. For 3 more years, Nero ruled. But the fire had broken something. The Senate's hatred intensified. The people's love cooled. Military commanders in the provinces grew restless. In 68 AD, just 4 years after the fire, revolts broke out. The Senate declared Nero a public enemy. His guards abandoned him. On June 9, 68 AD, as soldiers came to arrest him, Nero committed suicide. His last words were reportedly, "What an artist the world loses in me." Even in death, he was theatrical. The aftermath, memory, myth, and manipulation after Nero's death. His successors worked hard to erase him. The Domus Aurea was stripped of its treasures. Vespasian drained Nero's artificial lake and built the Colosseum on the site, returning that land to the people, a pointed rebuke of Nero's selfishness. The Senate issued a damnatio memoria, attempting to erase Nero from official records. His statues were torn down. His image chiseled off monuments. His name became synonymous with tyranny, and the story of the fire was rewritten. Over the following decades, as historians like Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio wrote their accounts, Nero became the unambiguous villain. The emperor who burned Rome, who murdered Christians for sport, who cared only for himself. Some of this was true. Nero was erratic, cruel, self-obsessed. But some was exaggeration, propaganda written by his enemies after he couldn't defend himself. The Christians Nero persecuted, they remembered. As Christianity grew, Nero became the first great persecutor, the Antichrist figure. Revelation, written decades after Nero's death, contains coded references to him. The number of the beast, 666, likely refers to Nero's name in Hebrew numerology. For Christians, Nero became a warning and a symbol. The empire that had seemed eternal would fall. The persecutor would be judged. Good would triumph. The truth we lost, so what's the truth about the Great Fire of Rome? Honestly, we'll never know for certain. The ancient sources contradict each other. Archaeology can tell us where the fire burned, but not how it started or who, if anyone, was responsible. What we can say is this: the fire was probably accidental, sparked in a district full of flammable materials, spread by wind, and made catastrophic by Rome's overcrowded, poorly planned urban landscape. Nero's response was mixed. He did help immediately. he did implement meaningful reforms. But he also exploited the disaster to build his dream palace, and he did scapegoat an innocent religious minority to deflect blame. The persecution of Christians was real and horrific. But it was also relatively brief and localized to Rome. The idea that Nero hunted Christians throughout the empire is later. Christian tradition, not historical fact. And the image of Nero fiddling while Rome burned. Pure legend. But it stuck because it captured something people wanted to believe, that Nero was so disconnected, so monstrous, that he could find beauty in catastrophe. Here, what haunts me about this story? How many other historical facts are like this? How many villains were more complicated than their legends? How many heroes less heroic? History is written by survivors, by victors, by people with agendas. Nero was a bad emperor. That's not in dispute. But was he the monster we remember? Or was he a flawed, theatrical, ultimately mediocre ruler who made terrible decisions and got blamed for everything, fair or not? Lessons from the ashes, the Great Fire of Rome teaches us several things, and not all of them are about ancient history. First, cities are fragile. Rome seemed eternal, invincible. Then, in 6 days, most of it was gone. Modern cities face different threats, but the lesson stands. What we build can be destroyed faster than we imagine. Second, crisis reveals character. Nero showed both competence and selfishness. The Christians showed courage. The mob showed panic and cruelty. When everything falls apart, you see who people really are. Third, propaganda works. For 2,000 years, we've believed Nero fiddled. It's not true, but it doesn't matter. The story was too good, too perfect. Truth matters less than narrative. Fourth, scapegoating is easy and dangerous. Nero blamed Christians because they were convenient, marginal, and different. It worked for a while, but ultimately, the cruelty backfired. The same pattern repeats throughout history. Find an outsider group, blame them for society's problems, unleash violence. It never ends well. Finally, cities rebuild. Rome burned, but Rome survived. Within a generation, it was magnificent again. Within a century, it was greater than ever. Disasters feel apocalyptic in the moment, but humans are resilient. We rebuild, we adapt, we continue, walking through ruins. Today, if you visit Rome, you can still see traces of that terrible fire. Underground, beneath modern streets, archaeologists have found the burn layers. Charcoal and ash from July 64 AD. The Colosseum stands on Nero's artificial lake. The baths of Trajan cover part of the Domus Aurea, in a very real sense. The Rome you visit today is built on the ashes of the fire, shaped by Nero's aftermath. Some of the Domus Aurea survives, buried and forgotten for centuries, rediscovered during the Renaissance. You can tour parts of it now. The rooms are dark, damp, stripped of their gold and jewels, but you can still see faded frescoes, still sense the megalomaniacal ambition of the place, and you can imagine for a moment what it must have been like. To stand in Rome in July 64 AD, to see smoke rising from every direction, to hear the screams, to wonder if the world was ending, and then to wake up the next day to find the city still smoldering but still standing, to begin the long work of rebuilding, to bury the dead, to find lost family members, to start over. That's the story that moves me. Not Nero's madness or Christian martyrdom, as important as those are, but the ordinary Romans who lost everything and chose to rebuild anyway. The families who stayed, the craftsmen who returned to work, the merchants who reopened shops, the slaves who cleared rubble. History remembers emperors and saints, but cities are built by everyone else. The fire that never stops in a strange way. Rome is still burning, not literally, but metaphorically. The fire of 64 AD has burned through to millennia of history, literature, art, and imagination. It burned through the writings of Tacitus and Suetonius. It burned through Christian martyrology and anti-imperial rhetoric. It burned through medieval manuscripts and Renaissance paintings. It burned through Hollywood movies and historical novels. Every generation rewrites the story. Every age finds new meanings in the flames. In the early Christian era, it was proof of Roman wickedness. In the Enlightenment, proof of absolutist tyranny. In the modern era, a cautionary tale about urban planning and propaganda. The fire won't stop burning because we won't let it. We need the story. We need the drama. We need to believe that somewhere in the chaos and tragedy, there's meaning, lesson, warning. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the fire's real legacy isn't the buildings it destroyed or the people it killed. Maybe it's the conversation it started about power and responsibility, truth and lies, cruelty and compassion. Nero died believing he was an artist the world would mourn. He was wrong. But 2,000 years later, we're still talking about him. Still arguing about what he did or didn't do. Still learning from his failures. In that twisted way, maybe he achieved the immortality he craved. Not as an artist, as a warning. So the next time you see a dramatic painting of Nero with a lyre, watching Rome burn, remember, it probably didn't happen that way. The truth was messier, more complicated, more human. But also remember those 6 days in July when 1 million people watched their world turn to ash, when an empire trembled, when the eternal city learned it wasn't so eternal after all. And remember that Rome rebuilt, that people survived, that even from the worst disasters, something new can emerge. The fire consumed Rome, but Rome consumed the fire right back, swallowed it, and rose from its ashes stronger than before. That's the real miracle. Not that Rome burned, but that Rome endured.